As CEO and chairman of IBM, I got to meet such great people and learn so many great things. I'm going to let everybody else see a little bit about the real people that I know. So Indra, I'm going to use the framework of your book as the framework for our interview, because I know you put your heart, your soul into that book. So Indra's book, My Life in Full. And the book comes in 3 pieces. So we'll do the interview on work, family, and future. So sound good?
Perfect.
Perfect. So let's start with work, okay? What brought you and I first together? So my first question on work is a little bit of context setting. And because kind of time, I always feel time gives us each perspective, and I would like to say some wisdom. And so my first question is, if I bookend your career and you think about how work has changed from when you first went into the workforce as a consultant, I think I remember that as your first big role. You know, kind of to how you look at work now, how would you describe it?
Yeah. Before I start answering this question, Ginni, I want to just say that you're one of the CEOs that I admired hugely. Not because you're a woman, just because you're just a damn good executive and a great CEO. You were a person of great consequence because you were leading IBM, which is one of the storied tech companies in an industry completely dominated by men. So I was in awe of you. And I was just glad that we became great friends. So the privilege has been mine all the way. And I've just loved watching you lead the company and grow and thrive and evolve. Now let's talk about your first question. You see, when I came into the workforce in 1980, when I started as a consultant in BCG, there was no PC. We only had a 4-function calculator to do numbers. At best, the HP 12C was just coming into the market, the calculator. So everything we did, we plotted graphs by hand, we did analysis the old-fashioned way, crunching numbers by hand. It was a very different world. And the way I would look at this is to say that for professionals, we spend 60% of our time on grunge work, all right? Over time, as technology crept into our lives and then started to overtake our lives, the grunge work went from 60% all the way to 2018, it was down to 5 or 7%. And you could now do the analysis faster, you could derive more knowledge from it, you could derive more intelligence from it, and you could actually do more productive things with the data rather than just sit there and do basic tasks that today the computer does. And so life changed enormously. The second thing that changed was communication. So think of it as computing. The second was communication. In 1980, the cell phone was not even invented. That came in later, and then it was this big clunker, the Dynatac. It was massive. And then when it went to the Motorola flip phone, the Razr was considered a major innovation. But the pager was considered a big innovation. And I loved wearing my pager when I was at Motorola. But to be honest, the smartphone, the Apple iPhone, revolutionized everything. All of a sudden, you had one device for computing and communications. And communications, not just talk, but music, video, everything started to come together. So all of a sudden, you didn't have to travel. You could do remote conferencing from your device. And then through the pandemic, COVID forced all these Zoom and Chime and Teams technologies to evolve. So all of a sudden, you don't have to travel much. You can have meetings remotely. You can actually spend more time at home. So I think I've witnessed a profound change in work life, in the working environment, if I want to call it that, all driven by technology. It's like I feel ancient at times. I feel like I'm cool and modern at times. But the fact of the matter is, I've witnessed one of the biggest disruptions in our lives thanks to technology.
All right, so stay on that theme of work. Let's talk about being a CEO. And so when you were very gracious in your opening comments, you said, well, I didn't think of you as a woman CEO. When I started, I always said to people, don't think of me as a woman CEO. I'll be judged on my merits. That's how we all can be judged. But as time went on, and I know you feel the same way, I did see that people needed to see role models, right? And that old saying, you cannot be what you cannot see.
It's interesting, Ginni, both of us, we were CEOs of large companies. PepsiCo is a Fortune 50 company, and I felt the weight of the responsibility enormously. But it was interesting. While I was thinking of myself as a CEO who happens to be a woman, the media painted me as a woman who happens to be CEO. And therefore, the focus was on the woman part as opposed to the CEO part. And that is a bit disconcerting because don't keep drawing attention to the fact that I'm a woman. There's no need for you to publicize me as much because I'm a woman, because just as much as you publicize me for ascending to the top, you're going to doubly publicize me on the negative side when I don't do something well, which is what used to happen all the time. So I wish they would just look at me as another leader. People did pigeonhole you as a female who happened to be a CEO. And I'll be honest with you, even in all of the roundtables and the chambers, there was always a male culture. There was a male bro community that sort of the male CEOs all had their tight-knit groups. So it was a double-edged sword. It got me a lot of publicity, but I'm not sure I wanted it. And I wish it had just looked at me as another CEO and evaluated me on those merits. But unfortunately, there were so few of us. They had to draw attention to the fact that we were women.
Yeah, you know, I agree. It's a double-edged sword, right? Because I would have seen, sometimes I'd read articles about myself and just the choice of words. If I was doing an acquisition, I was doing acquisitions and they call them shopping sprees. And I thought, why would you ever use the word a shopping spree for an acquisition of a big business, right? Yeah. You know, or I know you had the same, you know, something about my clothing, and you would see the same, right?
Absolutely.
And I always said, I guess, good and bad, right? Whatever you do will be magnified and personalized. When it's good, that's good. And when it's bad, that has an outsized impact. So I want to circle back though on advice for people who listen here, because like I said, you were one of the people that called me when I first began. So I'm kind of interested in who called you and what did you, if anything, learn from those phone calls?
You know, all the people who called me were male CEOs.
Well, there were no women.
There were very few. And that's why I tried to bring the women CEOs together. If you recall, I hosted a couple of the dinners at my home where I tried to bring us all together because I felt that it was important that we had our own sisterhood so we could just chat and take advice from each other. But there weren't, 2006, there were maybe 5 or 6 other women CEOs. The rest of them were all male CEOs. You know, Lee Scott at Walmart or Dave Dillon at Kroger. You know, people like that called and said, hey, we're there. We're so happy you got this position. We look forward to working with you. In your case, so Ginni, I was so thrilled that you were CEO because I'd known you before. And I just said, what a spirited choice. And the fact that you're a tech company CEO of such a consequential company just made me swell up with pride myself. So I just wanted to make sure that you knew that I was there for you.
You know, well, you did a great job at that, but I do, so I'm now 6 years later than you, right? So when I became CEO, a lot of people reach out, but what I do remember about those phone calls was I felt people genuinely did want to help. And that, you know, that's kind of like what I remembered and took away from it. And it reminded me about something you just said, that sometimes people think making time for those relationships or those phone calls is a waste, but it really isn't, because it's kind of about a long continuum, right?
Yeah, I agree with you. And just making that phone call gives people comfort that you're thinking of them and you're there for them.
Yeah, and I absolutely do. And so I hope people remember that from this interview of how important.